When he got to the one-minute managers, his secretary said, "You can go right in. He's been wondering when you'd be back to see him." As the young man entered the office, he noticed again how clear and uncluttered it was. He was greeted by a warm smile from the one-minute manager. "Well, what did you find out in your travels?" he asked. "A lot," the young man said enthusiastically. "Tell me what you learned," the manager encouraged. "I found out why you call yourself a one-minute manager. You set one-minute goals with your people to make sure they know what they are being held accountable for and what good performance looks like. Then you try to catch them doing something right so you can give them a one-minute praising. And then finally, if they have all the skills to do something right and they don't, you give them a one-minute reprimand." "What do you think about all that?" asked the one-minute manager. "I'm amazed at how simple it is," said the young man, "and yet it works. You get results. I'm convinced that it certainly works for you." "And it will for you too, if you're willing to do it," the manager insisted. "Perhaps," said the young man, "but I would be more likely to do it if I could understand more about why it works." "That's true of everyone, young man. The more you understand why it works, the more apt you are to use it. I'd be happy, therefore, to tell you what I know. Where do you want to start?" "Well, first of all, when you talk about one-minute management, do you really mean it takes a minute to do all the kinds of things you need to do as a manager?" "No, not always. It's just a way to say that being a manager is not as complicated as people would have you believe. And also, managing people doesn't take as long as you'd think. So when I say one-minute management, it might take more than a minute for each of the key elements, like goal setting, but it's just a symbolic term. And very often it does only take a minute. Let me show you one of the notes I keep on my desk." When he looked, the young man saw, "The best minute I spend is the one I invest in people." "It's ironic," the manager said. "Most companies spend 50 to 70% of their money on people's salaries, and yet they spend less than 1% of their budget to train their people. Most companies, in fact, spend more time and money on maintaining their buildings and equipment than they do on maintaining and developing people." "I never thought of that," the young man admitted. "But if people get results, then it certainly makes good sense to invest in people." "Exactly," the manager said. "I wish I had had someone invest in me sooner when I first went to work." "What do you mean?" the young man asked. "Well, in most of the organizations I worked in before, I often didn't know what I was supposed to be doing. No one bothered to tell me. If you asked me whether I was doing a good job, I would say either, 'I don't know,' or 'I think so.' If you asked why I thought so, I would reply, 'I haven't been chewed out by my boss lately,' or 'No news is good news.' It was almost as if my main motivation was to avoid punishment." "That's interesting," the young man admitted, "but I'm not sure I understand it." Then he added anxiously, "In fact, if it's all right with you, maybe I could understand things better if I could get to some of my why questions. Let's start with one-minute goal setting. Why does it work so well?" "You want to know why one-minute goals work?" the manager said. "Fine." He got up and began to pace slowly around the room. "Let me give you an analogy that might help. I've seen a lot of unmotivated people at work in the various organizations I've been employed in over the years, but I've never seen an unmotivated person after work. Everyone seems to be motivated to do something. One night, for example, I was bowling, and I saw some of the problem employees at work from my last organization. One of the real problem people, who I remembered all too well, took the bowling ball and approached the line and rolled the ball. Then he started to scream and yell and jump around. Why do you think he was so happy? Because he got a strike? He had knocked down all the pins. Exactly. Why don't you think he and the other people are that excited at work? Because he doesn't know where the pins are, smiled the young man. I get it. How long would he want to bowl if there were no pins? Right, said the one-minute manager. Now you can see what happens in most organizations. I believe that most managers know what they want their people to do. They just don't bother to tell their people in a way they would understand. They assume they should know. I never assume anything when it comes to goal setting. When you assume that people know what's expected of them, you are creating an ineffective form of bowling. You put the pins up, but when the bowler goes to roll the ball, he notices there's a sheet across the pins. So when he rolls the ball and it slips under the sheet, he hears a crack but doesn't know how many pins he knocked down. When you ask him how he did, he says, "I don't know, but it felt good." It's like playing golf at night. A lot of my friends have given up golf, and when I asked them why, they said, because the courses are too crowded. When I suggested that they play at night, they laughed, because who would ever play golf without being able to see the pins? It's the same with watching football. How many people in this country would sit in front of their TVs on a Sunday afternoon or a Monday night and watch two teams run up and down the field if there were no goals to shoot at or any way to score? Yeah, why is that? Asked the young man. It's all because clearly the number one motivator of people is feedback on results. In fact, we have another saying here that's worth noting. Feedback is the breakfast of champions. Feedback keeps us going. Unfortunately, however, when most managers realize that feedback on results is the number one motivator of people, they usually set up a third form of bowling. When the bowler goes to the line to roll the ball, the pins are still up and the sheet is in place, but now there is another ingredient in the game, a supervisor standing behind the sheet. When the bowler rolls the ball, he hears the crash of the falling pins, and the supervisor holds up two fingers to signify you knocked down two pins. Actually, do most managers say you got two? No, the young man smiled. They usually say you missed 8. Right on, said the one-minute manager. The question I always used to ask was, why doesn't the manager lift the sheet up so both he and his subordinate can see the pins? Why? Because he has the great American tradition, performance review, coming up. Because he has performance review coming up? Wondered the young man. Right. I used to call that NIHYSOB, which stands for Now I Have You, you SOB. Such managers don't tell their people what they expect of them. They just leave them alone and then zap them when they don't perform at the desired level. Why do you suppose they would do that? The young man inquired, being very familiar with the truth in the manager's comments. So they can look good, said the manager. What do you mean, so they can look good? Asked the young man. How do you think you would be viewed by your boss if you rated everyone that reported to you at the highest level on your performance review scale? As a soft touch, as someone who could not discriminate between good performance and poor performance. Precisely, said the manager. In order to look good as a manager in most organizations, you have to catch some of your people doing things wrong. You have to have a few winners, a few losers, and everyone else somewhere in the middle. You see, in this country, we have a normal distribution curve mentality. I remember one time when visiting my son's school, I observed a 5th grade teacher giving a state capitals test to her class. When I asked her why she didn't put atlases around the room and let the kids use them during the test, she said, "Well, I couldn't do that, because all the kids would get 100%, as though it would be bad for everyone to do well." I remember once reading that when someone asked Einstein what his phone number was, he went to the phone book to look it up. The young man laughed. "You're kidding." "No, I'm not kidding." He said he never cluttered his mind with information he could find somewhere else. Now, if you didn't know better, the manager continued, what would you think of someone who went to the phone book to look up his own number? Would you think he was a winner or a loser? The young man grinned and said, "A real loser." "Sure," the manager responded. "I would too. But we'd be wrong, wouldn't we?"